We begin with Ukraine firmly back in the spotlight. Now, after months of the war against Iran dominating headlines, attention appears to be returning to the war in Ukraine. Today, U.S. President Trump and other world leaders at the G7 summit in France met with Ukrainian President Zelenskyy. European leaders are pressing Washington to refocus back onto Ukraine. Now, the meeting comes at a significant moment for Kyiv. Ukraine has slowed Russian advances on key sections of the front line. It has opened formal negotiations to join the European Union. And despite uncertainty over future U.S. support, Ukraine remains central to European security. Now, all of this stands in sharp contrast to that tense Oval Office scene last year between Zelenskyy and Trump and U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. Now, back then, Trump told Zelenskyy that Ukraine had, quote, no cards. Well, today, with Russia still struggling to advance the front lines and with European support for Kyiv stronger than ever, Ukraine seems to be playing with a much better hand. Ukraine also demonstrated its ability to strike deep inside Russia recently. Drones hit the largest oil refinery in the Moscow region. Ukrainian attacks on Russian energy infrastructure have doubled since the start of the year, contributing to disruptions in refining capacity and putting pressure on supplies of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. Well, now that Donald Trump says the Iran conflict is effectively behind him, he says he can turn his attention back to a war that he promised that he could end in 24 hours. He, as we said, has never kept that promise. I want you to take a listen to what Trump said today after meeting Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
We had a very good meeting. Look, Russia should make a deal. Russia's lost tremendous amounts of people, and so has Ukraine. Last month, they lost 35,000 soldiers between the two of them. Think of it. This is on a monthly basis. They averaged 25,000 people, mostly soldiers, young, beautiful people. And it's crazy what's going on there. But we had a meeting, and we'll see how. I spoke with President Putin on Sunday.
Well, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, he has made it clear he considers Russian President Putin to be the sole obstacle to peace. For his part, Zelenskyy says he is ready and willing to negotiate a deal to end this war, and he says he has the unanimous backing of the G7.
Ukraine is ready for the war to end and for a ceasefire, while Russia is not demonstrating any serious activity in these directions. Everything else is some kind of game, and everyone understands what kind of game it is. What's important is that everyone at the G7 meeting recognizes this. That is important. These are important changes. I think these are political changes that truly matter. The entire G7 unanimously supports Ukraine. Thank you. That's all.
And joining me now is Rudik, a member of Ukraine's parliament. She is leader of the Liberal Holos Party and one of Ukraine's most visible international voices since Russia's full-scale invasion of her country. Kira, it's good to have you back on the program. You know, a year ago, after that Oval Office confrontation between Trump and Zelenskyy, there was a sense that Ukraine was on the back foot diplomatically and militarily. Today, going into the G7, Ukraine seems to be back at the top of the agenda. How much of that is down to Ukraine's own actions?
Hello, Brent, and thank you so much for having me. It is really heartwarming that right now at this point, speaking President Trump's language, Ukraine has got some cards. And these cards we have gotten not only because we received lots of support from our partners, and we are grateful for that, but because Ukraine has done its homework. We have invested strongly into our own military productions and weapons production. We are working very quickly for our army to adapt to the newest technologies, and Ukrainian army is developing those technologies every single day. We are reforming our army and our troops, and right now we are able to show some progress in wide range attacks on Russia oil refineries and controlling the land bridge to the temporarily occupied Crimea. This is something that we are able to move forward with, and President Zelenskyy can show up for in these negotiations.
President Trump says that this new Iran deal allows Washington to focus once again on Ukraine. Do you believe that?
I believe that the attention may be here. However, if the United States strategy to pressure Ukraine and not Russia wouldn't change, I do not believe that the deal then is possible. President Trump has been promising one thing: peace through strength. Well, it means pressuring aggressor because Ukraine has done everything by the book. Basically, everything that the United States administration have asked of us, we have completed, starting from all these attempts of negotiating with Russia, ending with this rare earth minerals deal that Ukraine's parliament has ratified, and I have voted for it alongside with my party, that will give the United States the stake in Ukraine's future and really economic interest. However, we still cannot see President Trump turning his eye to Russia and start imposing real sanctions, making sure that the existing sanctions work, and again, talking hard to Putin about what's going on.
President Trump, he said after meeting Zelenskyy that Russia should make a deal because of the human cost of the war. I mean, he sounds like a peacemaker there. But did you hear anything today that suggests that a new diplomatic push is taking shape?
I didn't hear what kind of deal is offered, because the deal where Ukraine is sacrificing the land that Russia hasn't occupied just yet is not a good deal for us. The deal that does not include security guarantees that Russia would not attack us again is not a good deal for us. The deal that does not bring justice to all the war crimes that Russia committed is not a good deal for us. And I'm sure President Zelenskyy knows what can be presented to Ukrainian people and what cannot. And he was very open about it in his open letter to Putin.
Let me get your take on this, Kira. Your country, you have had bad experience with other countries guaranteeing your security. If there are other security guarantees put in a new peace deal, would you ever be able to accept that? I mean, can you trust another country again as you have done in the past?
It will be very hard, because it's not even a question, Brent, about if Ukraine can trust any other country. I would ask it if any country in the world right now can trust anybody else to protect their own security. I think we have seen, especially with the US partners in the Gulf states, that it can be very tricky. And even if there are some alliances, they are not always honored. And it's very hard to end the war once it is started. That's why any security guarantees should come all together with financial support so Ukraine can invest in its own military production and supporting its own army. Because as we see right now, the best sanctions are the ones that Ukrainian army is imposing on Russia, and the best security guarantees would be the ones that we will be able to provide ourselves.
Let me talk about your European allies. The German foreign minister was quoted today saying that there is a chance that talks could start this summer. The German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, he has spoken of a window of opportunity. Why would they be saying that?
Because in politics and geopolitics, you should be seizing every opportunity. And there is no other country than Ukraine that wants this war to be over soon. Every day we are indeed losing people. But the question is, would the time be enough? And would US and our European allies be ready to pressure Russia for real this time, sanctioning all ships from the Shadow Fleet and not just yet another 10 out of 900. Would our partners be ready to provide like a long-term solution for the military production and security guarantees? We know that there would be elections in midterms in the United States. We know that different countries of European Union will be facing elections next year. So yes, the window of opportunity is here, but it's not only on Ukraine to be seizing it.
Let me ask you about what we've seen from Russia. I know that Russia launched another major wave of attacks recently on Ukrainian cities. What message is Moscow trying to send?
That they still are ready to fight, and that they are trying to show that they are really strong which is completely untrue, because what they can really do is really attack peaceful civilians in their homes. And what they cannot do is to fulfill the promise that they will take our territories like Donbass and many others. So, for example, Brent, 2 days ago, even my kitchen window was broken by debris of a missile. This is our reality every day. Russia will be continuing attacking civilians, but we are withstanding it. We are very strong, and we will not capitulate to these attempts to bring us into submission.
Yeah, I mean, you do bring up a good point. Ukraine has slowed Russian advances in many areas, and it continues to strike targets that are deep inside Russia. How much leverage, though, does that give Kyiv in any future negotiations?
I think it would depend again on this cumulative effect of both the sanctions, so-called sanctions that Ukraine is imposing on Russia, and like economic sanctions from the United States and Europe, because Russia's economy would not sustain both destruction of oil refineries and military productions and real bans on their shadow fleet. But if these two tracks would work separately, it would be much easier for Russia to sustain and continue. And this is what we have seen in this recent past.
Ukraine has now formally opened negotiations to join the European Union. There's a slim majority of support among EU citizens for Ukraine to join. But beyond that, I mean, what practical difference could joining the European Union make while the war is still going on, or even, entering into these talks? Isn't that more of a distraction?
Oh, it's not a distraction. This is one of the goals that Ukrainian people have, and it is written in our constitution. We, Brent, when you are fighting, there should be something not only that you are fighting against, but what you are fighting for. And our future in European Union, our ability to drag our country finally away from Russia or any Russian influence, our access to the markets and also European access to Ukrainian markets, our ability to exchange the newest technologies and share Ukraine's experience, both in the security and military production, in the technological advancement that we have gotten. I think this is something that we are all looking for. And it's not that Ukraine will be a really recipient, but also someone who is sharing something new, something important, both in economy and manpower.
Ukrainian lawmaker Kira Rudik. Kira, as always, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. Good having you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I want to pull in now our Europe correspondent, Rosie Birchard. She is at the G7 summit in France. Rosie, President Trump's renewed interest in the war in Ukraine probably has a lot to do with the ceasefire deal with Iran, but does it mean that U.S. support, or the lack thereof, is changing?
What is changing for sure is the rhetoric and the messaging around this. The Europeans and the Ukrainians were kind of huddling before this summit. They had a mission to try and get Trump on side and trying to convince him essentially to get tougher on Russia. And what we have heard from President Trump is him saying that Russia should make a deal, and crucially saying that he may reimpose some Russian oil sanctions, which were lifted temporarily, or so far they've been lifted due to the upending of the global energy system that was caused by the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz. What we don't know yet, Brent, is whether they have achieved any sort of change in actions. President Trump has been pretty thin on the details of the delivery of that idea, for example, to reimpose oil sanctions, and that's not really anything new, right? We've seen this before, where he says one thing and then the question is, what will he actually do? And that will be the measure of what's achieved from the European side, I think, at this summit.
Okay, that's the assessment then of U.S. President Trump. How strong, Rosie, is support for Ukraine right now here in Europe?
pretty strong overall. I think if you look at any measure of it, whether it's the money, I mean, remember we saw this 90 billion euro loan signed off from the EU side to Ukraine, and what's really crucial about that is not a cent of it came from the US. Whether you look at military aid, so weapons that are being sent to Ukraine, a lot of that's coming from Europe, especially Germany, or whether you look at diplomatic support, getting the Ukrainian president into key diplomatic fora, like what's happening today. So there is substantial European support there. But of course, they do still need the US in some way or other. And that's really those kind of gaps that still need to be filled is so much of what's at stake here.
Yeah, let me pick up on that for a second. It is interesting. So many things have changed since the war with Iran started back at the end of February. And now both Europe and Ukraine, they desperately need Washington's support, don't they?
They need support from Washington, not in terms of quantity. Remember, the Europeans are filling those gaps when it comes to financing, when it comes to the bulk of the weapons, but in terms of the quality or the type of support. There are some things the US has that the Europeans simply don't, specifically some types of weapons, some kind of air defence. Those are sometimes called strategic enablers. And then, of course, there's all the questions of military intelligence. US intelligence has been incredibly crucial for Ukraine's position on the battlefield. Now, the Europeans and the Ukrainians say, look, this is a moment to be seized. There are signs that Russia is weaker, whether it comes to the day-to-day of warfare, the economy, or Vladimir Putin's own standing in his position and how he's viewed among ordinary Russians. They want to say to Trump, okay, this is the time to act. And of course, the big question after these talks wrap is, will he act? And if so, how? Because of course, when the US president has his eyes on something and when he's in a deal-making mood, that can also be a kind of risky moment. We've seen in the past fears that he would try and cut some kind of quick deal with Russia that would be bad for Ukrainian security, and that's exactly what they're trying to avoid here.
All right, our very own Rosie Birchard at that G7 summit in France. Rosie, as always, thank you.